On behalf of the Executive Committee, I am delighted to recognise the recipients of our Awards for Leadership in Gifted Education. The first award is the Emerging Leader Award, which recognises individuals in the early stages of their career in gifted education who evidence impacts of teaching, research and/or advocacy in their country or region. These individuals show promise for leadership and demonstrate evidence of service to the field. This year we are pleased to award two emerging leaders, Dr. Orla Dunn and Dr. Tyler Clark. Orla, I know you're here somewhere because we met. Would you like to come to the stage? Dr. Dunn is an assistant professor in the School of Inclusive. I want to tell you a bit about Orla. She's an assistant professor in the School of Inclusive and Special Education and academic program manager for the Centre for Talented Youth Ireland at Dublin City University. Orla is known for her research on LGBTQ young people and is currently designing Ireland's first postgraduate gifted education program. Congratulations, Orla. There's your award. Congratulations, Tracy. I think they want a photograph. Yep. Where's our photographer? Congratulations. And it gives me the greatest of pleasures to invite Dr. Tyler Clark to the stage. Dr. Clark is well known to many of us as the Executive Administrator of the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children. Tyler has multiple roles in the Center for Gifted Education at Western Kentucky University, including Assistant Director of Operations and Co-Director of the Talent Identification Program. His many service roles, publications and presentations extend far beyond the World Council and WKU through his international and national collaborations. Congratulations, Tyler.
Thank you.
It's heavy.
I know. I carried it.
Congratulations.
And then let's get one with Orla so that we're both together.
I'll get in the mother in the middle. And our next award, the A. Harry Passau International Award for Leadership in Gifted Education, which acknowledges those who pave the way towards the future through their international stature as a leader in gifted education. This award is given to one whose life and work have significantly influenced policy and practices or promoted the cause of gifted education. This year, the Executive Committee is pleased to present the A. Harry Passau International Award for Leadership in Gifted Education to Professor Susanna Perez-Barrera. Professor Perez-Barrera has spent nearly 3 decades researching, teaching, influencing and advocating for gifted education, particularly in Uruguay and Brazil. Dr. Perez-Barrera is widely recognised as a leading figure in gifted education across Latin America and has made many international contributions to the development of the next generation of researchers through her ongoing research, supervision, service and leadership. Congratulations, Susanna. Goes that way. Thank you. I think we have to come over here for a photo. It's heavy. I'm very honored. Congratulations. Thank you. I'll now invite Eleanor to come to the stage.
Good morning to you all. I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Karine Verschueren. And Karine is a full professor in School and Development of Psychology and the Faculty of Psychology and Educational Sciences at the Catholic University in Leuven in Belgium. She investigates the psychosocial, motivational and academic development of children and adolescents in school and the role of social interactions and relationships with teachers, peers and parents. She studies these developmental processes both in general student populations and among academically gifted students. Most of her research is longitudinal and includes a broad variety of methods, and her research is also closely connected to educational and clinical practices. She and her team coordinate a scientifically support network of schools and professional learning communities that share evidence-informed educational practices to support academically gifted students' development. She's the co-editor of the upcoming European Handbook on Gifted Education and Talent Development, and she investigated several topics of interest related to academic development, such as teachers' recognition of cognitive potential or motivational pathways leading to gifted underachievement. But today, she will share her insights regarding social relationships as context for academic talent development. And I would like to thank EDSA for sponsoring Professor Verschuren's keynote. Karine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eleanor, for your kind words, and thank you, Executive Committee, Local Committee, and also Tyler Clark for organizing this conference and for inviting me for this talk. It is a pleasure for me to present some of my work for you, because I noticed yesterday that you are very eager to learn new things, so I'm looking forward to it. Today I will talk about social relationships as context for academic talent development, and as Eleanor mentioned, she did not mention it, but I'm actually relatively new to the field. I started doing research in the field of giftedness and talent development about 10 years ago. We were lucky back then to have a large funding for a large-scale talent project, which was an inter-university project, and this was the start and the foundation of the Expertise Center Talent. The research mission of this Expertise Center is to gain more insight into the psychosocial, the motivational, and the academic development of academically talented and gifted youth, and also the role of the social and learning environment. But from the start, we did not only want to have scientific impact, but also impact on educational practice. So we really want to improve the support given to academically gifted and talented students, and to also improve the evidence base. And we also contribute to the professional development of educators together with 20 anchor schools, and 2 of them are present today also in the audience. Okay, so today I will talk about the research that we did, not about the professional development. And as Eleanor said, we had several research lines that we invested in, like teachers' recognition of high cognitive ability, mental health of high ability students, motivational pathways leading to gifted underachievement. We also developed interventions for gifted underachievement and tested their effectiveness. And we looked at the adjustment to educational transitions, like the transition to secondary school or to higher education. But one of our main research lines was also considering the social relationships of high ability students and the role these relationships play in the development of high ability students' engagement and achievement. And that is what I will talk about today. More specifically, I will address 2 main research questions, or two main questions. First, what does research our own research, but also other research. What does it indicate about the social competence of academically gifted and talented children and adolescents? And second, how can relationships and interactions with key social partners, peers, but also teachers and parents, facilitate or hinder academic talent development? But first, I will have a look at the background of our work, of our research, the underlying models. You all know that there are different definitions of giftedness and also different models and even paradigms of giftedness. But most contemporary models, they agree that giftedness and talent can manifest in different domains, like in the domain of arts, in music, in sports, and also in the cognitive domain, which is the domain we will focus on today. And also most contemporary models agree that these gifts, these talents, these gifts or abilities or aptitudes, they need to develop. So they have a developmental view on giftedness. They need to develop through learning, through coaching, through support into achievements, into acquired competencies. And in this development, non-cognitive personal factors play a role, like motivation, like self-efficacy, but also contextual factors play a role, environmental factors, and these are the factors I will address today. The social contextual factors, the role that relationships with peers, teachers, and parents play in this transformation of abilities to achievement and talent. In the vision we share with the schools in Flanders, in Belgium, we think it is important to emphasize that the goal, the objective of talent development is not only to realize cognitive potential and to have excellent achievement, but also to have children that are engaged, really engaged with learning, that feel good at school, that maintain positive well-being, and that can also develop personally, that have the ability to explore their personal identity. So these are important objectives, these psychosocial factors. In our view, they are important objectives in their own and not just as supports for excellent achievement. But now our main questions. So first, what does research indicate about the social competence of academically gifted and talented children and adolescents? Well, if you would ask laypersons what they think about the social competence of gifted youth, then they will probably say, well, they are really smart, but they are not socially that competent. You really see that portrayal very often also in popular media. And this has been called by researchers the disharmony hypothesis. It is the idea that you cannot have it all. If you are academically talented, then you will have to pay the price in another domain. So this academic competence will come at the cost of social competence. In our own research, we looked at whether these negative stereotypical beliefs about social competence also occurred among teachers and among pre-service teachers. And unfortunately, this appeared to be the case. We looked at this question in an experimental vignette study with teachers in training in their final year, and some of these teachers read a vignette displaying a child that was labeled as gifted, and other teachers, they had the same vignette, but the child was described as having average ability. And then we asked these teachers to rate the child's social competence, also their personality, and also the relationship they expected to have with that child. And what we found is that the child that was described as gifted was seen by these teachers as less socially competent, less agreeable, less emotionally stable, and also they expected to have more relational conflict with the child. And what's more, when we added information in a condition, counter-stereotypical information, namely that the child has many friends, this could not buffer these negative judgments. So they still rated the child as being less socially competent than a non-gifted child and an average ability child. These negative beliefs also seem to occur among students themselves, among peers, although this has been investigated less. But in a recent study that we did, we found that students who were described in a vignette also as being gifted, that they were seen by peers, by grade 7 and 8 students, as being less socially competent than non-gifted peers. And this was especially the case for students who were described as being gifted in math. And in another German study, they found that students who were described as high achievers, as excellent performers in math, science, or languages, they were seen as less socially minded than high achievers in sports. This raises the question, of course, to what extent are these negative preconceptions that exist among lay people, teachers, peers, to what extent are they informed by the actual social competence of academically gifted and talented youth? And to answer that question, we first need to have a look at the concept of social competence. Recent developmental literature says that social competence is actually an umbrella construct that consists of different layers or different levels. First, you have the level of the individual, and this refers to individual social skills and social cognitive skills. But then you also have the level of the interactions, which refers to the verbal and nonverbal exchanges between individuals that can be observed. The level of the relationships is still another level. These are the dyadic relationships. It's more than interactions. It's a succession of relationships and also meanings and expectations and emotions that are involved in these successions of interactions. And then finally, you also have the level of the group, the social network within which individuals interact and within which these relationships are embedded. And social competence thus refers to the child's capacity to engage effectively and successfully in each of these levels, and also within the relevant culture. This is important, of course, also for practitioners or for counselors to know, because if there are concerns regarding a child's social development or social functioning, it's important to assess which of these levels is involved. Does a child have limited social skills? Well, then it needs to be trained in these social skills, because otherwise the problems will continue even though the child moves or transitions to another peer context. On the other hand, if the skills are fine, but the child does not belong in the group or does not have close friendships, then you also need to work with the context. It will not be sufficient to work with the child alone and to do a social skills training. So these things, these latter levels also depend on the social context, not only on the child, and also on the alignment or the fit of the child with that social context. Now, if we look at the literature regarding academically gifted children and adolescents and their social competence, and we look at it at these different levels, then we can conclude that from the research that is available today, we can say that at the individual level, usually or generally, academically gifted students have been shown to have better perspective-taking skills, better social cognitive skills. This is not surprising because it's also related to cognition, and also better recognition of emotions, better reasoning about emotions. So generally, they do better at that level of individual skills than other children. But also at the level of interactions with peers, we see in general less externalizing behavior, and we know from developmental literature that externalizing behavior is one of the primary factors in peer rejection. So they show less of these risk factors, risk behavior in that sense. Also, in general, they show better self-control and more cooperative peer interactions. At the level of the relationships, these depend all more on the context, not only on the individual, but in general, you also see that academically gifted children have at least as many friends as compared to other children. And also in the group, we see that they are at least as accepted in the peer group and that they are generally less rejected by their peers as compared to typical students. So in general, this is a quite positive picture that contradicts the negative stereotype that can be found among teachers and among peers. But if we have a closer look at the literature, we also see that gifted children's own perspective tends to be less positive than the perspective that others have of them, or that peers themselves have of these gifted children. I cannot see. For instance, we have seen in our own research that although they are nominated more as friends by their classmates, they themselves, the gifted children themselves, they nominate less classmates as their friends, probably because they have higher expectations of what constitutes a friend. Yeah. Also, research has shown that in general, they tend to perceive lower friendship quality and also lower intimacy within their friendship relationships, probably also because of high expectations for these friendship relationships. We also found in a study in grade 6 that children tended to underestimate their acceptance in the peer group, so also at the level of the peer group. They were actually better liked than classmates, but they thought they were equally liked as other classmates. And also a recent meta-analysis has shown that the social self-concept of gifted children is slightly lower than the social self-concept, and that is the sense of being socially competent and accepted, than the social self-concept of non-gifted children. So this is a less positive picture that is painted here, and it is important because even though it may not reflect reality, these self-perceptions may still guide children's behavior, and they may guide children's interpretations of future interactions, and thus act as self-fulfilling prophecies. So even if it's an underestimation, it's still important to pay attention to it. And in one of our recent studies, we looked at this own perspective of students more deeply. It was a multi-method study, and it concentrated on a concept that is probably less widely known, and that is the concept of affinity for aloneness. Affinity for aloneness refers to having a positive attitude towards being alone, towards spending time alone, that you want to spend time alone. Yeah? We looked at this affinity for solitude, and we compared it between high ability children and average ability children, and we matched both groups, 270 students in each group. We matched them on SES, on school, and on gender. And what we found is that high ability students, they had a greater affinity, a higher affinity for being alone than the non-gifted students, than the average ability students. That is not negative, that is not a problem in itself, because it depends on the underlying motivation, on why you want to be alone. So we also asked, why do you want to be alone, in an open-ended question, and we coded it using content analysis. And then we saw that only for one of the motivations, there was a difference between the high ability children and the other children, and unfortunately it was a negative motivation. We had expected also more positive motivations, but it was a negative motivation. Namely, they said more than other children, well, I want to be alone because then I can be myself. Or I want to be alone because then I don't need to worry about what others think of me or how others may judge me. So this negative motivation was mentioned more by the high ability group. And this high ability group was not pre-selected, so it was a non-selective sample, a representative sample, and based on achievements on cognitive tests, they were selected as being high ability. So this underscores the importance of identifying those high ability students who may isolate themselves, who may withdraw from interactions with their peers due to a social misfit, or I would say due to a perceived social misfit, because it's really their feeling and their perspective. And it's important, of course, to provide targeted support to these students and to foster their sense of belonging. On the other hand, we should not forget that this is a minority of the high ability children. Only about 1 in 10 of the high ability children that we investigated, they named this reason. They had this reason for being alone. The majority of them, they had positive reasons or neutral reasons to be alone. And positive reasons can be because of creative tasks, doing academic tasks, having time for reflection, etc. Yeah. Okay, so this brings me to another point I think is important to make, that is, there are a lot of differences within the high ability group. It's important to emphasize this because the previous studies, they all looked at differences between high ability students and other students and average ability students. But of course, within the high ability group, there are also a lot of differences in social functioning, in peer social functioning. And we explored these differences in one of our studies, and more specifically, we looked at feelings of loneliness. And feelings of loneliness, these are negative feelings of a discrepancy between the relationships that you want and the relationships that you have. Well, there are a lot of differences among high ability students in their feelings of loneliness. And we wanted to explore what makes some of these high ability students more vulnerable for loneliness than other students. And we looked at several factors that have proven to be predictors of loneliness also in general populations. And indeed, these factors were also relevant for the high ability students. There were factors in the context, like children who were better accepted in the peer group. They showed lower feelings of loneliness. And children who had less friends, they showed higher feeling of loneliness. Children who were victimized by their peers, they also showed higher, more feelings of loneliness. And these independently contributed to these feelings of loneliness. So it's not enough to look at victimization only, for instance. There are also other factors in the social context, in the social belonging, that can predict these feelings of loneliness. These are the social context factors. But then also personal factors, personality factors were found to contribute to these feelings of loneliness. Like children who were more introverted, they were also more vulnerable for developing feelings of loneliness. Children who were less emotionally stable, they also developed more loneliness over time. And then within this high ability group, we also found that children with higher levels of intelligence, with higher levels of cognitive abilities, with exceptional cognitive abilities, that they also reported higher feelings of loneliness. And we have reasons to believe that this is probably because for them it's even more difficult to find similar peers because they deviate even more from the average child, of course. Okay, so if we wrap up for this first research question, what does research indicate about the social competence? Well, there are definitely negative beliefs, negative stereotypical beliefs about the social competence of academically gifted youth. The actual social competence as seen in performance tests and also as judged by others and observed by others, this is generally positive, and this is positive at all levels of social experiences. We had expected it to be positive at the individual level, but it actually is also positive at the other levels. The self-perceptions, on the other hand, are somewhat less positive on average, but there are large within-group differences that depend on personality and also on the social group and the fit with the social group. Now, for the practitioners here in the audience, what does this imply, or how can we support then the social competence of gifted children and adolescents? Well, first, it is important to facilitate opportunities to engage with peers with comparable abilities and with shared interests, because we know from research that indeed birds of a feather flock together. So if children seek out friends who are similar to them, they make friendships with children who are similar to them more easily, and they feel accepted more easily in a group that shows more similarities with them. But I want to emphasize also that the similarity does not need to be fixed only on academics. So children, also academically gifted children, can have other interests too. They can have interests in sports, in music, in theater, in a lot of things. They can have a lot of hobbies. And they also can find friends and companions and like-minded peers within these other interests beyond academics. So we should not forget that, and we should not only focus on seeking friends with similar academic competencies. That's an important message I want to give to you. Also, acceleration, of course, we know that it has a lot of academic benefits, but it can also have social benefits for some children. So it's probably a good idea also to consider these social benefits. It might provide children with a better suited peer group that fits their interests and their abilities more. Then also enrichment classes, of course, they group academically talented children together for some time, so they also offer opportunities. But there is research to suggest that this will probably not be enough to just group the children together. You actually have to promote these peer relationships explicitly by, for instance, fostering collaborative work towards shared objectives. If you do not do that, then competition can rise, and then the peer relationships can even suffer from that. So it's important to really invest explicitly then in these peer relationships. And this leads me to the final point, to also involve teachers, especially if there's something in the social context or in the fit with the social context. It's important, if it's possible for you, to also involve teachers, because they have been described in the literature as the invisible hands in the classroom, especially in elementary classrooms, and as the social architects who can have a lot of influence on the peer relationships that children have. If teachers are positive towards a child, then children also tend to be positive towards the child. So they act as a social referent and can also manage peer relationships by seating arrangements, by promoting collaborative work, etc. Okay, that's for the first part, for the first research question, but we have a second research question. So in the second part of my presentation, I will address that question, and that is, how can relationships and interactions with key social partners facilitate or hinder academic talent development? Okay. Okay. So you know all these models, of course. It's the achievement orientation model, mega model of talent development, Gagné's model, and you also have a lot of different contextual models like axiotope model of Ziegler, and they all emphasize more or less the role of the context, the role of the environment in developing talent, and also the role of the social context and the social relationships. So they all say that in addition to non-cognitive personal factors, also the social context, the interactions with peers, with teachers, and with parents, they can lead to abilities being transformed into achievement, and also they can have an impact on the development of engagement and of well-being. However, we also see that the account of the social context is sometimes a little bit more global. So we really also need a more differentiated and empirically based account of the role of the social context in our theoretical models. And to do that, we need longitudinal research that looks at different social partners and that also looks at different potentially relevant dimensions of interactions with these partners and of relationships with these partners. In our own project, we had the opportunity to have 2 large-scale longitudinal studies conducted in which we were able to follow students, large samples of students from grade 3 in elementary school to higher education in the first sample, and in the second sample from the start of secondary school until the end of secondary school. In both of these studies, we also had a close look at the social relationships and interactions of these students and at different motivational and academic outcomes of the students. Both studies were conducted among non-selective samples and used standardized cognitive assessments that measured both fluid reasoning and crystallized intelligence. And to define the high ability group, we usually took the top 10% of these of the students compared to a representative age group. So the students who scored among the top 10% on these cognitive ability assessments. If you want a summary of the findings. You can find it in that article in the Journal for the Education of the Gifted. But I will summarize also some main findings for you today. And we will first see at what we found from these studies regarding the role of peers in the development of engagement and of achievement. Well, we could look at different aspects of peer relationships. We could look at the role of peer acceptance, for instance, but we addressed in our studies the role of peer group norms. And norm theory makes a distinction between, on the one hand, injunctive norms, and they describe what should according to the peer group, and also descriptive norms. Descriptive norms, this is the norms we focused on in our research, and they describe the typical behavior in the peer group, the average behavior in the peer group. So they describe what is in the peer group, but still this influences individual students' behavior because of processes like information exchange, but also modeling and also reinforcement. So still, norm theory expects that the peer behavior, the typical peer behavior, will have an effect on individual students' behavior. We looked at these peer norm influences for behavioral and emotional engagement. These are two important aspects of engagement. Behavioral engagement refers to the effort invested in school or in the active participation in class, and emotional engagement refers to interest, enjoyment, enthusiasm, etc. And you also have disengagement, of course. Now, what we found is that if the classroom peers, if they were more engaged behaviorally or emotionally, well, this positively impacted the engagement of individual students. We found this in both of our samples, in both of our studies, and in one of the studies we also compared the influence of different types of peers, like friends, classmates, popular students in class, and we found that definitely friends were the most influential peer group. So the engagement of one's friends, they have the clearest, the most robust impact on one's own emotional and behavioral engagement and disengagement. We also looked separately at this high ability group, at this top 10% group, and we found that they were also susceptible to peer influence effects, and in fact they were generally equally susceptible to peer influence effects as compared to other students. So in general, we found that peer norm processes were similar across students' ability levels. There was only one exception, namely for emotional engagement, for friends' emotional engagement, we found an even stronger influence, a stronger effect for the high ability students. You can see that in this graph. So when the average emotional engagement of friends is higher, then the individual emotional engagement also becomes higher over time. But for children with higher cognitive ability, we see that this is even steeper, this relationship. This is even stronger. So they are even more affected by the emotional engagement of their friends. Interestingly, we also found this the other way around. So we also found in social network studies that when students who were perceived as intelligent by their peers, who were perceived as smart, when they were more emotionally engaged in class, when they showed they liked learning better, they liked being in class more, well, this positively affected also classmates' emotional engagement. And I think this is very good news to also share with schools and with parents, because teachers and parents, they sometimes worry that if you pay attention to the educational needs of high ability students, then other students might suffer from that. And actually we see here that at least for emotional engagement, they actually benefit from high ability students learning or liking learning at school. So it is not a trade-off here. So what do these findings regarding the role of peers and peer norms imply? Well, first, they point to the dual nature of peer socialization. On the one hand, peers can have a negative influence, so if they are more disengaged, individual students are also likely to be more disengaged, and we actually found that this is an influence effect. It's not just a selection effect, that students who are disengaged, they group together, they seek out each other, they select each other. Using social network analysis, we saw that this is indeed the case, but there is also an influence effect of these friends on later engagement over time. So peers can have a negative effect, and this negative effect is often emphasized in the literature, also in the giftedness literature. If one talks about peer influence, it's often in a negative way. Well, our research shows that they can have a negative influence, but they can also have a positive influence. They can also increase each other's engagement and interest in school. So also among academically gifted students, highly engaged peers are an important source for fostering investment in learning and for fostering interest in learning. And we should use that source. We should use these peers, for example, by increasing exposure to highly engaged peers, by increasing access to highly engaged peers, for example, by grouping students together around projects for which they have a shared passion. Then if they share this passion, they can increase the passion among each other. Conversely, we saw that supporting the engagement of academically gifted students can also benefit their classroom peers. So there is no trade-off in this respect. Okay, that's about peers. I'm going to drink a little bit. Now let's turn to the role of teachers. There's a lot of research on teacher-student relationships in the general literature, and a lot of research is based on attachment theory, on an attachment perspective, that emphasizes the importance of the effective quality of teacher-student relationships for children's learning and also for their socio-emotional development. And a lot of studies, also longitudinal studies, have shown that when children have a close, supportive, warm, caring relationship with their teacher, this has a positive effect on their academic outcomes and their socio-emotional outcomes. When they have a negative, conflicted relationship with the teacher, this predicts more negative student outcomes. Well, in our research, we looked whether this effective teacher-student relationship quality would also be important for high-ability students' engagement and achievement. And we indeed found that when children have a close and supportive relationship with their teachers, that this has a positive effect over time on their engagement, behavioral engagement, emotional engagement, and also on their achievement. In contrast, when they have a negative, conflicted relationship with their teacher, this leads over time to more disengagement. And this is what you may notice sometimes with the adolescents or with the students that you work with, that they say, so why would I even do the effort for this teacher? He never or she never even notices me anyway, or she doesn't care about me anyway, or I can't do any good for her or for him anyway. We also found that for high-ability students from a socially disadvantaged background, this effect of negative teacher-student relationships was even more pronounced. So for that group, it is even more important to try to avoid these negative and conflicted relationships with teachers, because they withdraw even more from engaging in school. What we found here is not new. It is in line with previous research using other designs and also using other identification methods for academic giftedness. For example, Del Siegli, in one of his studies, a retrospective qualitative study, a focus group study among university honors students, he found that when they looked back at their secondary school career, they said that high school teachers were inspiring when they showed that they cared about them, that they knew them personally, and that they wanted to help them. And also Anouk Baks from the Netherlands, she also did a qualitative study on asking children, elementary school children, on what is a good teacher according to you, and she did content analysis on their answers. And gifted elementary students, and these were students in a special gifted class, they most frequently refer to feelings of relatedness with the teacher. So the feeling of trust with the teacher and understanding from the teacher. So these studies all show that, of course, we all know that academically gifted students, they need advanced content, they need challenging instruction, they need expert teachers who are passionate about their subject, but they also need teachers that support them, that value them, that understand them, that care for them as a person. We should not forget that, because that is also important for their academic motivation, their well-being, and their achievement. And you don't need to be a gifted expert to provide this kind of support to children, to students. You can do this by doing simple things. You can build stronger relationships with your students, like greeting them personally or taking some time to listen to them if they have worries or if they have concerns. Listen also to their perspective, showing interest, showing trust in them, acknowledging their effort, even though they also make mistakes. So we can really, as a teacher, make a lot of difference for students in general, but also for academically gifted students. Attachment theory is one of the main theoretical frameworks to look at social interactions between students and teachers. Another important framework is self-determination theory, which is a motivation theory. And self-determination theory says that students' motivation and engagement depends on whether their need for relatedness is met, but it also depends on meeting their need for autonomy and meeting their need for competence. So all students have a basic need for relatedness, autonomy, and competence. And autonomy is not the same as freedom, but it refers to a sense of volition, to a sense of self-determination. I do this because I really want to do this. I study because I really want to study. Meeting these needs for relatedness, autonomy, and competence, their teachers can play an important role by showing involvement and also by supporting the autonomy and by providing structure. Autonomy support is, for instance, providing relevant, meaningful learning tasks, providing choice whenever possible, using inviting language instead of controlling language, and these all are conducive to this sense of volition, to this sense of self-determination of students. Structure refers to clarity of expectations, clarity of instruction, giving enough feedback, clear feedback, and also guidance when needed. So these are, and this is important for a sense of competence. This is called need-supportive teaching, this kind of teaching in these three dimensions. And in our research, we investigated if this need-supportive teaching is also important for high-ability students' engagement and achievement. And we looked at it in the general student populations and then also for high-ability students in particular. What we found is that these three teaching dimensions, so the perceptions of involvement, of autonomy support, and of structure, all had a unique contribution to children's engagement. They were all important in children's engagement. And autonomy support was also related to later achievement in a unique way. This was true for the total sample, and it was also true for the high ability students. So we found similar effects for high ability students and for typical students. And this is interesting and kind of unexpected, because previously we saw that teachers, they expected that involvement would be important for all students, but that structure would be less important for the high ability students' motivation, and that autonomy support would be more important for gifted students' motivation. That is the prevailing idea among teachers. Well, this research, this study, at least seems to contradict this. Autonomy support is important for high ability students, but it is also important for typical students. We did see that teachers provide more autonomy support to high ability students in general, or at least they perceived receiving more of that support. And structure is not less important. Also, gifted students, also academically gifted students, they also need clear instructions, clear guidance, feedback. So it's not because they have strong academic skills that they do not need this structure from the teacher. So it's equally important for them. Okay, so to conclude about teachers, we see that teachers can really make a difference for the development of students' motivation, well-being, achievement, engagement. And in general, we see that similar interaction dimensions that have been found to be relevant among students in general, they are also relevant for high ability students. This is not surprising, perhaps they are also individuals with the same needs. So these similar interaction dimensions are important for all students, regardless of ability level. However, most probably the way these concepts, these general concepts are filled in will need to be different. For instance, structure is important also for high ability students, but the way this structure is provided, ideally, is probably different in terms of the level of detail, or whether it is more task-oriented or more at the metacognitive level, the number, the frequency of hints given. So the way you fill out this structure, this will need to be different, of course. And this principle has been called in the literature as universalism without uniformity. So it's universal psychological processes that are at work, but the way they are implemented or filled in, they may differ according to the target group. Yeah? So this may be important to include also in teacher professional development, to also pay enough attention to the quality of teacher-student interactions. That's important, relying on general developmental and motivational theory and research, but also to look together with the teacher to discuss and to try out how you can implement these general principles, these general developmental and motivational principles when educating academically gifted students. Like, how can you provide enough structure and clear instructions without thwarting the sense of autonomy? Yeah? Or how can you encourage students to persevere when they are frustrated or when they do not like it, but in an autonomy supportive way. This is not easy, but it is important, I think, that teachers look at that together and that they try out things and learn from each other in that respect. Okay, and now in the final part, last but not least, I will say a word about the role of parents. And here I'll approach this role from another angle, because we did not look at the role of parents in the development of achievement or of engagement, but we looked at the role of parents in the development of self-beliefs that may hinder academic talent development. That was the focus of our research. And these self-beliefs are like low social competence, fixed mindset, maladaptive perfectionism. That were the things we looked at, but also we looked at one other important vulnerable maladaptive self-belief, and that is academic contingent self-esteem. I don't know if you know that construct, but people or individuals who are high on contingency of self-worth on academics, they only feel good about themselves as a person, they only feel worthy as a person when they meet academic standards, when they have academic success. Then they feel they are worthy as a person. When they fail to meet these standards, when they have an academic failure, they are not only disappointed about this failure, but they feel disappointed about themselves as a person. They think, I am a failure as a person, I am not worthy, I am not good enough. So it really has implications for their global self-worth. That is a high contingency of self-worth, and we found in other studies that this high contingency of self-worth is really a risk factor for disengagement and for underachievement among high ability students in particular. But these maladaptive self-beliefs, you can situate them in the model I showed among the non-cognitive personal factors that have an effect that can hinder, or that can, in case of maladaptive self-beliefs, they hinder the transformation of abilities to talents or to achievement. And we looked at how parents, as a contextual factor, have an effect on these maladaptive self-beliefs. And more specifically, we looked at the role of parental feedback and communication, because you can have a look at several parenting dimensions, but that was the focus of our research, parental feedback and communication. And here is what we found. Well, first we found that if adolescents think, if they have the impression that the affection of their parents, the love of their parents, is conditional upon their academic success, like they think my mother likes me less when I do worse than expected at school, or my father loves me more when I have good grades, or my father loves me more than my brother because I have good grades and my brother has bad grades. So this kind of conditional parental regard, this tends to be internalized, and this raises the risk for developing a contingent academic self-concept. So that the self-regard becomes also conditional and contingent upon reaching these academic standards. So these children tend to think also, I feel worthwhile only when I do well academically. Yeah? So they tend to internalize it. And this conditional regard from parents is also found to predict self-critical perfectionism and worrying excessively about mistakes. So these children who receive more conditional regards, or they perceive more conditional regards from their parents, they think more, if I do not do well all the time, people will not respect me, for instance. Yeah? We did not only look at conditional parental regard, we also looked at parental praise. And parental praise can be person-oriented, or you can praise a child because of fixed person characteristics, like, well done, you're so smart in math, or I knew this would be too easy for a whiz kid like you, or yes, because you have a great talent in math. And this praise can also be process-oriented. You can also praise a child when he has good grades or when he does well, for persevering. Yeah, well done, you persevered and that has paid off, or for the effort that he has invested, or for trying different strategies. So good that you tried different strategies and that you succeeded in solving the problem that way, or for seeking help when they have problems. So this is all process-oriented feedback. And we found in our studies that person-oriented feedback received from parents, they were related to fixed mindset beliefs. So these children who received more person-oriented feedback, they were more likely to say you're either smart or not, and if I don't perform well, it shows I'm not smart. While children who received process-oriented praise, they were more likely to develop a growth mindset and to believe in the importance of effort, like by investing effort, you can learn and you can get better. So the way this praise is given is really important. A third factor that we looked at were parental expectations, excessively high parental expectations, and criticism. These were not higher in general among the high ability children than among other children. I should mention they were actually lower. So it's not a general problem, but we saw that if parents show excessively high expectations, if they show criticism for the child, like my mother wants me to be the best in everything at school, or my father never tries to understand my mistakes in school, then we saw that this increased the risks of maladaptive self-beliefs and specifically the risk for self-critical perfectionism. Yeah. So, while in general parents of adolescents with high cognitive abilities were not fine to rely more on these parenting practices that led to the development of maladaptive self-beliefs, we did see that if they showed excessively high expectations or high levels of criticism or conditional regard or person-oriented feedback, that their children were more likely to develop vulnerable self-beliefs. And these vulnerable self-beliefs, they in turn increase the risk of underachievement and of not actualizing cognitive potential. So for parents, or if you have contact with parents, of course it's important to set high goals, but they should be realistic, set high but realistic goals. And this should take into account not only the cognitive abilities and strengths, but also the other strengths or challenges. So, and it's also important, of course, to support children in reaching them, taking into account these strengths and challenges. Also, it's important to make sure that expression of affection is not dependent upon children's success or failure. Of course, as a parent, we think, of course, I love my child regardless of what he does, and he should know it or she should know it, but this is not always the case. Sometimes children may worry about that, so it's good to sometimes say that explicitly or show that explicitly. And then finally, important to give feedback on the task or on the process, and to not rely too much on person-oriented feedback, because this may lead to vulnerable self-beliefs that may hinder children in their academic development, but also in their personal development in general. So praising children for the effort they invested, for the help they sought, for the flexibility they had in strategy use are all important. But of course, this also requires that children have enough curricular challenge, that they do need to invest effort, because you cannot praise a child for investing effort if he does not have to do anything to have excellent grades. So curricular challenge is really important for that too. Okay, I have come to the end of my talk, but not without thanks to all the people within the talent team that have contributed to our research in these past years. You see them all here. And also I want to thank all the schools, the anchor schools, the 20 schools in Flanders, and their professional learning networks with which we work together in this project that is funded by the Flemish Ministry of Education. And I would also like to thank you for your attention.
Karine, thank you for a wonderful lecture. I find it very informative, and I really enjoyed the way you presented it. But maybe there are some questions from people in the audience. Are you happy to? We still have 6 minutes, so if you're happy to answer some of the questions.
Thank you very, very much for a very interesting presentation. I've recently published an article on, sorry, it's me speaking, very sorry, Karine Sims from Sweden. I've recently published an article about giftedness in relation to extended cognition. And the idea that you only sort of function as a gifted person in the environment, but not that you are separate from the environment, you are part of the environment, and that's what sort of makes you also the possibility of expressing your gifted talents and so on. But if I understand you correctly, you separate cognition from social abilities or social, could you just develop that a little bit? Because for me, those are not separate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is the way that research works. If you want to investigate relation between variables, you have to separate them, or you have to measure them separately, even though the conclusion may be that they are interrelated and they are important for developing academic giftedness. So in fact, these findings show that social relationships are an integral part of this process of development of abilities into talents. But if you want to study it, then, or in a quantitative way, then it's also important to have these variables measured in a very valid way, and then to see what the relationships are. Do you understand? Yeah. Okay.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Poon, and I'm from Sydney. Hi, Karine. Thank you for your talk. I've got sort of like, I guess, a question about classroom practice. So I work with a lot of students who are gifted, and sometimes they like to work with other students who are not necessarily gifted, but they are motivated and maybe share the same interests. On the other hand, I want to provide opportunities to those gifted underachievers who don't provide a very good classroom climate, they are not motivated. Do you have any suggestions about like how to, in terms of grouping, you don't want to leave aside those gifted underachievers, but you also want to encourage teachers not simply to, I guess, encourage those who are outwardly motivated to work with the gifted, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, that would be another talk, I think, on gifted underachievement. But I see the risk that teachers may pay more attention because it's more rewarding to work with high-performing students, and they may pay more attention to these students. But still, it's important, and especially for students with risk factors, to provide enough support also for these students, to provide enough structure to support their autonomy. And sometimes they also need to have individual counseling. We did a counseling interventions for underachieving gifted student, for instance, that focused on these maladaptive self-beliefs, but you can also have another motivational profile, namely the low value beliefs. You don't see the use of school, or why should you invest? It's not valuable, it's not important, it's not interesting. So there are promising interventions that work with the gifted students only, with the underachieving gifted students, and that can promote their achievement. Others have developed them too. So I think it's both within the class and making teachers aware of the needs of these children. But sometimes it's not enough, and then you also need to do individual counseling.
Okay, we have time for one question left. So, yes, Lineke.
Good morning, Ms. Verschueren. Thank you for your interesting keynote. You mentioned that the relationship between teacher and student is even more important for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I wonder if you have any ideas why that is.
Well, actually it is in line with a general finding in the teacher-student relationship literature, and that is called the academic risk hypothesis. Like children who have more risks of failure in school, they are even more dependent upon the support they get from teachers. Teachers are important for all children, but especially they are even more important for children who have risks for failure at school. And of course, these socially disadvantaged children, they are in general more at risk for this school failure. So for them, it's even more important to have a good relationship because they sometimes lack resources at home, so they are even more dependent upon the resources they get in school.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Professor Verschueren, Karine, thank you very much for joining us. As a token of our appreciation, I have a small little something for you to take home and to put on your desk. Looking forward to more information and looking forward to do some more reading about your subject and your research, and looking forward to see you socially. And if I'm correct right now, it is time for a coffee break. Am I correct, Tyler, or am I informing everybody wrongly? Everybody looking, yeah, coffee, no coffee available. Coffee in the cloisters, and I will see you all in the next couple of sessions, starting sharply at 10:30. Karine.
Thank you.